Hello everyone, and thanks again for watching another one of our pre-concert videos. This video is for the On Stage with HSO concert on September 10, 2022, coming up in less than a week, and we're looking forward to seeing you there. We started doing these pre-concert talks online last year with the COVID, and so many of you liked being able to watch them online and not having to get to the hall before 6:30 that we thought we'd continue this year. So thanks for watching. I'll direct you also to the program notes where you can listen to these pieces and be very well informed, we hope, by the time you come to the concert. So I thought maybe we'd start off. I'm here with Johannes, our conductor. He's the one who conceived of this program, chose all these pieces. I have not played any of these before, so it's been a challenge to learn this music and to get to know all these different styles. So I thought maybe we could start off by having Johannes tell us why he chose all these pieces.
Yeah, hello everyone. Thank you for joining our talk. So that's my job, right? To keep the orchestra members on their toes and not just recycle the same old pieces, but give them a fresh new program. So the title of this concert has changed, right? It is no longer Classics Up Close, but now On Stage with HSO. So we are in the Müller concert hall, and there is an opportunity for audience members to join us on stage in sort of a horseshoe circle around the orchestra. So we would like to continue the notion of a smaller orchestra where in a more intimate setting that presents music that is of a slightly smaller caliber in terms of intimacy of the music, but also the genre is not quite as large or exuberant. So you will notice that all of the pieces are French or French inspired. They're all French composers with the exception of Guillaume Lequeux, who is Belgium, but he moved with his parents to Paris as a teenager. So we could basically call this a French program. There are no symphonies and not even a concerto on this program. The solo clarinet piece is only 8 minutes long and it's called a Rhapsody. So while it features a soloist, it's not a traditional concerto format. And also you don't have to keep track of a sonata form and theme A, theme B, because there are no symphonies on the program, right? They're all sort of character pieces. And there is kind of a secret connection between all of those pieces. And I think we're going to talk about that as we go through each piece. So yeah, more enjoyable. The longest piece is 17 minutes. That's the Ravel, the very first piece. So shorter character pieces that evoke a mood or a feeling, less of an intellectual program and a little bit more, shall we say, yeah, character piece or inspirational music.
Yeah, and one thing that's been interesting to me is I've dived into some of the information about these pieces. They were all written within a 32-year time span and all in France. So it's a remarkable diversity of music and sounds and colors and moods and styles all within basically a 32-year time span in the same place. So sometimes we talk about French music and we think about Debussy and Impressionism, but there's a lot more to French music than just that. So we start off with the Ravel, Le Tombeau de Couperin. That's actually one of the latest pieces on the program, finally written in 1919, orchestrated then, but written earlier between 1914 and 1917. Ravel started this as a piano piece. I've always assumed this title translated as the tomb of Couperin, which is true. Tombeau does mean tomb, but as I've learned, a tombeau is also sort of a memoir or a piece of music written in honor of somebody. So Ravel was looking back to the French Baroque keyboard, which usually would mean harpsichord suites that Couperin really perfected, and started off writing these as an homage to Couperin and that style of French Baroque dance suite. Interestingly enough, got interrupted by a major event in Europe that happened in those 19 teens, World War I. tried to serve, was not a healthy person, was very slight and often sick. So he was an ambulance driver, worked as a nurse's aide, and one can only imagine what he was subjected to in those two jobs. Not only the emotional toll that would have taken, but even just driving trucks and ambulances and being exposed to the poison gas definitely took a toll on him. And his mother died during that time, which also took a toll on him. And so by the time he was done writing the piano suite, which originally was 6 movements, he not only sort of paid homage to Couperin, but also dedicated each movement to someone that he knew who had died in the war. So it's quite somber at times, a little bit melancholy, a little bit spiky here and there in terms of its harmonies. Might make you sort of just a tiny bit uncomfortable here and there, some of the notes and intervals, but really a beautiful piece of work. It's a fun piece. It's challenging for all the musicians, especially the oboe, and a lot of the woodwinds that are featured. The very beginning is a famous oboe excerpt. So when oboists want to audition for an orchestra job, they almost always have to play this piece. And we should add perhaps that our principal oboe has requested this. So we aren't just trying to torture her with this. It's something she's looked forward to playing as well. Johannes, anything you want to add about?
That's pretty complete. That's pretty complete. The only thing I would say is, the connection between Ravel and Debussy, like you rightly said, they're not interchangeable. So while Ravel is often thought of as an impressionist, the label does not fit, right? He is better considered a neoclassicist, right? Because he's looking back to older forms, like here the French dance suite, and then reinterprets that in a modern setting. Another example of a composer who did that would be Ottorino Respighi. We have done his Ancient Airs and Dances. That is a very similar approach, but with Ravel, obviously with slightly augmented harmonies. So I think that's most notable about this piece. Like you rightly said, there is a strong feature of the wind section that perhaps to balance that later in the program, that's why we have a purely string piece with the liqueurs, just to give the winds a little bit of a rest. It is very taxing and features the winds in a very soloistic way. So yes.
So you mentioned Debussy and Impressionism. Maybe you'd tell us a little bit about what does Impressionism mean in music? I think a lot of us are used to seeing the famous paintings, Impressionistic paintings, but how is that reflected in music and maybe specifically in the Debussy?
Right. So the Debussy is very different. It is more free flow. That's why it's called a rhapsody. I would say it's more what a musicologist might call tone painting. So it is, I interpret it as more colorful, right? You're less concerned about strict forms and more about what feeling does this evoke, or what color. I mean, I might see a yellow and I might see a certain shape. Debussy wrote pieces that are called clouds, right? Nuage, or la mer, right? The sea. What is the sea? Well, the sea is images of waves and of movement, right? So it's more evocative and less formally strict. So with the Debussy, it's also historical, because when this piece was written, there was a very important time in France around 1790s. This is when a lot of the conservatories were founded, and Debussy was appointed to the Paris Conservatory as somebody who would judge competitions by none other than the director of the Paris Conservatory, Gabriel Fauré. And here is our connection to the third piece. So Debussy, during that time, wind playing was very important in France. They hired over 100 clarinet teachers. at the school is amazing.
It's a lot of clarinets.
A lot of clarinets, right? And they each had only like 4 students or something. So it's really amazing. But during that time, wind playing blossomed, and especially, you know, exploration in musical genres, expanding of the forms. And so Debussy was asked to write a piece. So he wrote this Premier Rhapsody, and then all the clarinet students participating in the competition had to play that. Now imagine you sit there as a judge hearing your piece by all these different students. He was not looking forward to it. There were some records of correspondence of Debussy where he says, oh, you know, I'm not looking forward. But at the end, he thought it was a success, and they picked a winner. And also the title kind of implies Premier Rhapsody. So maybe the next year he will play the second Rhapsody, but that never materialized. So there's just the one piece. But it's not a lengthy concerto. You know, it's short because it was supposed to be a test of artistic and the technical display by the students.
Certainly, as a string player playing impressionistic music, we play a lot of harmonics, which is a way that we can manipulate how the string vibrates to give it some very different sounds, make it sound sort of flute-like and bell-like. We do that a lot more than in some other styles of music. We use our mutes a lot, which gives it kind of a quiet, the vibrations are not as intense, a little bit darker color. So certainly we play around a lot with colors, a lot of pizzicato. The impressionistic composers really push the instruments to get a wide variety of sounds.
Yeah.
So after that, we go to 4A, which is probably, if anything is familiar on this program, you've probably heard that. The Pavane, it's one of his most famous pieces. Beautiful romantic piece, a little bit nostalgic looking back. It was written shortly after his father died, so some people think this might have been a reaction to that. It was written close to the time he wrote his Requiem. Again, maybe also sort of a reaction to the death of such a close person. He originally wrote a text to it. I don't, Johannes, have you ever heard this or performed this with a choir?
I have never. The feeling is that it doesn't add that much to it. So there are some recordings on YouTube with a choir, but it's almost never performed with voices these days.
Mm-hmm. But beautiful, simple, nostalgic piece. It's got sort of a pizzicato accompaniment through a lot of it that sort of keeps it from getting too melancholy, keeps it moving forward as well, but a short, beautiful piece. Followed by this Adagio for strings, which is not the famous Adagio for strings. I had never even heard of this composer. And I think part of the reason I've never heard of this composer is that he didn't live very long. He died just a day after his 24th birthday, unfortunately of food poisoning, but spent his early life in a small town in Belgium. As Johannes already said, his parents moved to Paris, and was César Franck's last student, so studied with Franck briefly before Franck died. I was very taken with Wagner and Wagner's sound and some of the stories behind Wagner's work. And his writing, this is a piece for strings only, but it's very complex. It actually has 10 different parts. There's a solo violin part, a solo viola part, a solo cello part, and then in addition to that, there are 4 total violin parts rather than the usual first and second. There are 2 viola parts and 2 cello parts, and then a bass part. So it's an incredibly complex piece of music. Since we use a pretty small orchestra for this concert, there are times when every person will be playing his or her own part. The harmony is complex. It's quite a delightful piece. I'm glad to be introduced to this. It too is fairly brief, but melancholy, certainly. How did you even discover this piece, Johannes?
I don't know. I sort of have a Google Doc, pieces that I come across, and I keep a record of things I want to do at some point. And this has been on this Google Doc for a number of years. And I'm like, you know what? This is like, we kind of want a string piece to balance the Ravel a little bit. So this seemed like an appropriate time to do it. As you rightly said, he had a very short-lived career, right? Died at age 24. However, when he was in his early 20s, he caught the attention of Eugene Isai, who is obviously, you know, Amanda knows, one of the star violinists, and I think he wrote his partitas or his etudes, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he requested that Lequeux would write a violin sonata for him. That's the G major sonata that premiered when he was 23, and that is his often and most performed and recorded work. So he was somebody who was a rising star that, you know, people knew, and it's just tragic that he died so very young. Yeah, but this is a fantastic piece that should be done more, and I think it's getting more attention as it's being rediscovered.
Mm-hmm. And then for something totally different, we close the concert with a piece by a composer whose name is pronounced Mio. It's a little different than it looks, called the Bull on the Roof, another piece I'm embarrassed to say I've never heard of and had no idea what the title meant. It also has the title The Nothing Doing Bar. I had no idea what that meant. Mio was also wrote this in 1919, but before that, again, was unable to serve in the war, so served as the secretary for a friend of his in Brazil. His friend was an ambassador at the embassy. He was a poet, actually, at the embassy, the French embassy in Brazil. So Mio went along as his secretary and fell in love with Brazilian music. Spent some time on his way back to France, stopped off in New York for a while, spent a lot of time in the nightclubs of New York, so heard a lot of jazz. And envisioned this piece. He originally thought this might go along with something. He wrote it as if it might accompany a silent film or some sort of pantomime. He didn't really have much terribly specific in mind. But what it is, it's a rondo, and a rondo is a piece that has one theme that keeps coming back again and again and again. And in this case, this funny little syncopated rondo theme appears 12 times, I believe, and it's almost 12 different keys, which frankly is a little bit annoying as a musician to have to learn the same tune in so many different keys, but that I think gives us a glimpse into his sense of humor. And then in between each of those settings of the rondo tune, he's got some Brazilian or jazzy folk tune, all kinds of South American dances. It's really a fun and delightful piece. Someone came along later and actually wrote a ballet of sorts to it, choreographed it, gave it a story, set it in a speakeasy, because this was, of course, the Prohibition time in New York. And so the Nothing Doing Bar was that, whenever the police showed up, all of a sudden it became a milk bar. So, nothing going on here. And then there's all kinds of craziness that ensues, and a police officer that gets his head chopped off, and then it gets put back on, and the police officer gets stuck with the big bill at the end. And I think it was very funny, very just fantastical. It was a big success. It was sort of re-envisioned for a Paris nightclub, for a Paris audience, and that nightclub was called The Bull on the Roof. He also actually named it for a Brazilian song called Bull on the Roof. So that's where the name comes from. It doesn't really have anything to do with a bull on a roof. It's just sort of funny and cute and fun, just like the piece is.
I would say there's a secret connection to the rest of the program, and that is the Lequeux. Guillaume Lequeux was credited with foreshadowing some of the more experimental music. Even though he liked César Franck and he adored Wagner, he in his own composition, as trying to find his voice, some people hear Satie or even Mio in that music, and so he kind of foreshadows some of that. And then Mio, besides being a brilliant composer, was also a very famous teacher. So he taught many future jazz and classical composers like Dave Brubeck, Philip Glass, Steve Reich, Karl-Heinz Stockhausen, and Yannis Xenakis. So you kind of see a connection all throughout into the 20th century. Mio was also part of Les Six. That is the group of 6 prolific 20th century composers. We all had to learn who those 6 people are, sort of like the mighty Russian 5, right, in music school. And what sets Mio apart a little bit is that he starts to use polytonality. Now, polytonality is polytonal, so different keys at the same time. While we think of polytonality, we think of somebody like Stravinsky, you know, and Petrushka and The Rite of Spring using tone clusters. Mio would actually, like in this very piece, will have the orchestra play in 2 different keys, very small step apart, for a few bars. So the audience might think, well, there are some wrong notes in the orchestra, like what are they doing? But it's actually half of the orchestra playing in one key and the other for another, before it gets all recycled and put back to 0 in the ritornello. So it's a super fun piece. And part of the reason why we're doing it is because it just came off copyright, right? So a lot of this music is for Mio is still under copyright. However, Lux, it just expired, so Lux printed the parts, and now more and more orchestras are doing it because it's no longer super expensive to do this music as it's more common, and the publishers actually have music for sale. So it's a fun piece that gets done more and more, but it's tricky. It's probably the hardest piece on the program.
Good to know.
Good to know.
Keep practicing.
Right, exactly.
So this will be a really fun concert. It's just delightful to think that most of these composers probably knew each other or knew of each other or had run into each other in the halls of the Paris Conservatory, or somebody taught somebody who taught somebody else. So the interconnectedness will be really fun to explore. As Johannes indicated, this is a concert we used to do at the Methodist Church with people all around the orchestra and right up close, and we are unable to do that this year. So even though we're in the concert hall, you still have an opportunity to be really close to the orchestra if you would like to purchase a seat to sit on stage. So if you're interested in that, you can call the office or email the office. If you want to see what Johannes looks like when he's conducting and not just when he turns around and bows and talks, it's a pretty unique experience to almost feel like you're part of the orchestra.
Or you can sit on stage left and make faces as Amanda, you know, as she looks up at me, she's going to see.
That's true.
Yeah.
That's true. That's the other option.
Yes.
The other option. And one more point before we sign off, for those of you who are looking ahead to concerts coming up later this fall, if you have a question about a concert that you'd like us to address in one of these pre-concert videos, you can email hso@hollandsymphony.org and we'll try to address that in an upcoming video. But again, thank you for watching, and we look forward to seeing you on Saturday.
Thanks.